Dig, if you will, the picture. It's 1972, and a little 7-year-old Filipino kid is wearing black jeans with a hole in the knee, a white t-shirt, and low-top Chuck Taylors. He's on a green bicycle that is so big that he can't sit on the seat while pedaling. He can only stand on the pedals. He needs a curb to start and stop his roll and reach the ground next to the bike. He jumped that bike off of homemade ramps so much that he eventually bent the frame. His older sister's boyfriend, Peter, was a total gearhead. He owned a 1957 Austin Healey with a 327 cubic inch Corvette engine shoehorned into it. Pete always had a project muscle car he was working on, always favoring Chevys. He helped my dad buy a 1967 Austin Healey 3000 Mark III, which was the last year they were made. It's also the most collectible model in Austin Healey's line of cars. In mint condition, it could fetch nearly 6 figures today, and my dad paid $600 for it. My mom, however, drove a 1972 Cadillac Eldorado, and at 4'11", she sat on a pillow to see over the dashboard. We also had a 1962 Chevy Bel Air station wagon. It was the family wagon and later became my older siblings' surf wagon. My siblings, this car, and LA County beaches helped set my adult life in motion as a lifelong gearhead and surfer, and it all started in 1972. Welcome to the channel. I'm Marv, your host of the Road Trip Flip. Fast forward to my high school years, and that 1967 Healey was shipped over to our new home in Hawaii. My dad left California behind. I wasn't able to drive it yet, and my dad didn't see the utility of it, so he traded the Healey for a 1972 Lincoln Continental and a 1969 Volkswagen Beetle, both from the same owner. When I got my license at 16, guess which one I got? Yep, the Bug. Can you imagine if I was a 16-year-old with my hands on a 1967 Austin Healey convertible roadster? It had a mahogany dash, electric overdrive, straight six with dual side draft carburetors, and screamed like a bat out of hell, with an exhaust note, something akin to a hooligan with a proper British accent. The car was more Ewan McGregor than Roger Moore. The 62 Chevy wagon was sold long before we got to Hawaii. That would have been much better than a Bug. Little did I know, Marv's Bug would be the vehicle that defined me as a budding young gearhead. I had to work on it some days just to get to school. Other days, it got me to the beach where I body surfed on the east side of Oahu. One day, it caught fire on the way to the beach due to a loose fuel line. After pulling over and opening the deck lid, I beat the flames with my beach towel until the fire was out. I didn't notice at first, but my best friend and surf buddy Min Bui was running full speed up the freeway. He was in the emergency lane. He later explained he thought it was going to explode like a Hollywood stunt car. After putting the fire out and reconnecting the fuel line, we were off to the beach. It ran just fine with no issues, like nothing happened. Fast forward to college in SoCal, and I drove 2 more VW Bugs, a 1973 Karmann Ghia convertible, and a 1959 VW panel van. After a trip to the beach with a van load of chuckleheads, it was tastelessly named Auschwitz by surf bros due to its lack of windows. My best running car was a 1965 Chevy Corvair, a rear-engine sports car of its day. It really wasn't a great sports car in stock form, but still a looker in my eyes. They were raced professionally in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, heavily modified of course. Their motors were often swapped into sand rails and dune buggies, and even yanked out and replaced with small block V8s. I did like the look of the car as it had the same body lines of a 1964 to 67 Chevy Malibu. It was something I was familiar with as a rear-engine car. It had 6 horizontally opposed air-cooled cylinders like a Porsche instead of 4 like Volkswagens. I drove that before I joined the Navy in the late 80s. Ah, the US Navy. I was so lucky. Talk about being in the right place at the right time. The Navy was hiring like crazy after the movie Top Gun came out. I became an officer and a helicopter pilot with just a 2-year degree in 1989. The running joke was that my associate's degree was the best 5 years of my life. The starting pay was decent. As a new pilot, and far better than any civilian job I had so far. Some of my fellow pilots went out and bought Camaros and Mustangs to celebrate the ensign bars on their collar and the wings of gold they wore on their chest. I had to be different though. My ensign mobile was a black 1993 Harley-Davidson FXR. I rode that until a year into married life and ended up selling it to buy a family man's car, a 1994 VW Passat. I did eventually replace the FXR with a 1972 Harley Electroglide. It was a touring model that I restored in my garage. I had a little help, however. I pulled the motor and the transmission and sent them out for a rebuild, and had the sheet metal painted by a local painter, and the frame was off to be powder coated. I was thrilled to buy it in its original color and form, 100% bone stock, and that's how it looked after I reassembled it, just shinier. Like a dummy, I sold it, bought it back 2 years later, then sold it again. If I had to do it all over again today, I would have left it as a patina bike and just restored the motor, gearbox, and wiring. Then I would have kept it forever. Oh, the regrets. My active duty stint with the Navy only lasted 9 years, but I did finish and retire after 20 years as a drilling reservist. In the last 11 years in uniform, I was part naval officer and part civilian. In my off time, away from drilling, I went to a trade school called the Motorcycle Mechanics Institute in Phoenix. My goal was to work my way up the ranks in a Harley dealership, eventually leading to the GM's office, or own my own independent shop. I took every Harley class they offered. About that time, we did have a young toddler, my firstborn, my daughter. We suffered through a year and a half of hellish weather in Phoenix, and man was it hot, leading into and exiting the one summer we endured there. While I was a young dad and a Navy man, I didn't do much in the way of buying vehicles because family came first. That lasted for many years, even into the new millennium. We ended up having 2 kids 10 years apart, so my time behind the wheel, in the saddle, or on a surfboard was minimized in the name of raising kids. Toward the end of my Navy career, I did, however, get my real estate license and became a real estate salesman. The Harley dealership dream had since died by then. Part of that real estate stint involved me buying a realtor mobile, a 2004 Mercedes-Benz E430. I was told by my broker at the time, you have to play the part and look the look as a real estate agent. And so, impressionable Marvin, the new salesman, bought a Benz. Side note, as a mouthy teenager, I once told my dad I'd never join the military and I'd never become a salesman. The ironic part is, my dad, who was always a car guy, retired from the Navy as a senior enlisted man and was also a real estate broker, just like I am now. Back to the Benz. I loved it and I hated it. It was the smoothest driving car I ever had. It was so quiet that I had no concept of how fast I was going unless I looked at the speedometer. Plus, maintenance and repairs, they weren't cheap. After 3 speeding tickets and countless repair dollars later, I realized I didn't have to have a Mercedes to be a successful real estate agent. So, I traded it for a 1966 Impala, a complete and running project car. I wanted to make a bold statement by driving a classic car. I was, after all, selling old homes, and even bought a vintage 1951 tract home on a tree-lined street where that 66 Impala SS would look perfect sitting in my post-war era driveway. Ward Cleaver and Red Foreman would have been proud. That was yet another pivotal moment in what eventually would become my passionate side hustle, buying and selling old vehicles. I kept it for many years, but for the most part, it was always being worked on, and I hardly ever drove it because I replaced the engine, the transmission, the interior. All of these things just took longer than expected. I had it painted and had disc brakes put on it. I did everything to it with the goal of building a mild resto mod. And finally, when I had completed the project, the real estate market dropped off for me and unfortunately I had to sell it. Now, I did sell it for a lot of money because it was a super sport model, and it was quite nice when I was done with it. I do regret selling it, but then I'll always say this, can't keep them all. As the kids got older, I did start buying more project cars. This was mostly due to the cyclical nature of real estate being lucrative enough to allow me to start playing with toys again. In the list of cars that I bought and sold over the years, I had a 1967 Ford Galaxy convertible. It was a running beater, of course. Next came a rusty 1967 VW Bug with a hole burnt through the number 3 piston, a 1971 Chevelle wagon, a 1963 Buick Wildcat, and one of my all-time favorites, a 1972 Ford Country Sedan station wagon with a 400 cubic inch big block. That wagon was the last one before the road trip flip became a thing. Here's the part where the road trip flip was born. When my daughter graduated from high school, she decided to move to New Hampshire right away. She lived there for 2 years to work at a Catholic school as a teacher's aide. Room and board were included as part of her compensation. Funny thing was, at the airport when we dropped her off, she took me aside and asked, "Dad, you know how some kids go somewhere cool after they graduate? Do you realize you're sending me to a convent?" We laughed as I reminded her it was her choice, and she reminded me that she had my sense of humor. But after 2 years, she was ready to come back to warm weather, sunshine, and the Southern California ocean. So we planned her trip back home. Unfortunately, she did accrue some sizable keepsakes and stuff she wanted to bring back with her. I had this crazy idea that I would fly into New England, buy a vehicle, and pick her up along with her stuff in New Hampshire, then take a road trip zigzagging our way back home. I called an old Navy buddy of mine in Boston, Matt Miller. I asked him if I could visit a day or two and couch surf at his house, to which he said yes. He was an aviation officer candidate school with me, as well as flight school. I found a 2004 Volkswagen Passat station wagon on Craigslist that would fit the bill. After calling and asking the owner a million questions about the car, I discovered it could work just fine for what we needed. I set a date, bought the airline ticket, and as a backup plan, I called on 3 other vehicles asking the owners the same million questions about their cars. This VW, however, seemed to be the best option as it could be my surf wagon with great gas mileage and decent cargo capacity for surf gear. So it was set. I had 4 vehicles to look at along with a visit with my old buddy, and after arriving, it was time well spent. I spent 2 days catching up with Matt and his family. I then borrowed one of his extra cars to go look at the vehicles. And after a test drive, it felt like the Passat wagon was indeed the best candidate. It even came with aftermarket surf racks. Icing on the cake. After crawling under the car, reviewing old maintenance records, and transferring funds while we sat at the seller's kitchen table, we shook hands and it was a done deal. I bid farewell to Matt, then headed to New Hampshire to pick up my daughter. She was living and working with the sisters at the school. The sisters were all pleasant and fun to chat with, and surprisingly, some were from Southern California and spoke fondly of the West Coast. After packing the wagon and saying some heartfelt goodbyes, we took one of my all-time favorite pictures, a selfie with me, my daughter, and several smiling sisters behind us. It's a picture I never imagined I'd have in my photo file. Nonetheless, it documented the start of the best and only road trip I'd taken with my daughter. We took nearly 3 weeks to get home. We visited several friends of mine along the way and saw parts of the country we'd never seen before. I had never spent quality time with my daughter one-on-one on one vacation, just the 2 of us. And now she was an adult. It was the time of my life. I'm not sure if it was the same for her, but as a dad, I'm sure you dads out there can appreciate bonding with your kid as a young adult. I really enjoyed that trip so much that it stuck with me, and I always thought I would love to do that again. I wasn't aware that at the end of that adventure, that trip had set the tone for the rest of my trips since. And here you are looking at the road trip flip, the result of that adventure with my daughter. Every component of it is almost the same that I employ now, where I call friends and family and let them know I might be passing through town. I'll call on a handful of vehicles as part of my due diligence, and after chatting about a few strong prospects, I'll buy a one-way ticket. Then, I'll fly in, test drive, interview the owner, buy a vehicle, and road trip it home visiting more friends along the way. Most of the folks I visit are high school friends, Navy friends, real estate clients that moved away, even close friends from my surf community here in San Diego. The road trip itself allows for an epic tour of our country, many times to places I'd never seen. And of course, I'll be driving a vehicle I'm destined to enjoy for a little while, back home before I decide to sell it. You'll see a lot more of these people, places, and vehicles in future episodes, of course. Long story short, here's my recipe. Fly, visit, buy, travel, enjoy, rinse, and repeat. Some of you might ask, how did you arrive at the name Road Trip Flip? Well, the road trip part is self-explanatory. The flip is what I eventually do with the vehicles, since I can't keep all of them. While I've been known to hold on to these vehicles for a little while, I have to sell them at some point so I can go out on another trip. Plus, I just don't have enough room to store them. Here's another thing. There's dual meaning to the word flip. As I mentioned, I'm Filipino, born and raised right here in Southern California, and grew up with the word flip being an affectionate term for another Filipino. So there you are. I'm a flipping vehicles. Thanks for watching, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Check out my other videos, and if you like what you see, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell to remind you that we have more stuff coming. If so inclined, leave a comment below. Eventually I'll get to you when I'm not 1, on the road, 2, working on one of the vehicles, or 3, at a board meeting, surfing. My email is down below in the description, so feel free to email me. Also, spread the word. Tell your friends about the flip. Until next time, I'll see you on the flip side.